It's day 71. It's also July 15, 2019. And we are in Heppner, Oregon. You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description. Hey there, and welcome back. So, where was I? Oh yeah. Exiting Interstate 84 at the east end of the Columbia River Gorge and headed off to explore Oregon's Blue Mountain Scenic Byway. First stop, Heppner, Oregon. Heppner calls itself the Gateway to the Blues, the commercial and recreational center for the nearby Blue Mountains and Umatilla National Forest. The region is a popular destination for hunting, off-highway vehicle riding, and, thanks to some higher elevations that sometimes bring winter snows, snowmobiling and skiing can be added to the list of activities. Closer to town, 4 streams and the Willow Creek Reservoir provide good fishing. We would spend an evening in the Willow Creek RV Park enjoying the views of this reservoir and learning about Heppner. After several days of boondocking in Rufus, I figured a night in an actual RV park with full hookups would be nice. And it was. I would also chalk up another quick lesson or two about life in an RV. First up, cell coverage. Yup, it's a thing. Guess I never much paid attention to it, when it was always there. But if you're looking for a way to turn your $800 cell phone into a paperweight, or at best, a camera, then just head out into this part of the country. It would be nearly 3 days later before my cell phone pinged and buzzed back to life just outside Baker City, Oregon, and just before crossing over into Idaho. I would also spend the first 20 minutes in our RV spot trying to get that $500 cell signal booster I'd bought back home as far into the sky as I could on an extendable pole using everything from bungee cords to zip ties, only to figure out that if there's no signal to boost, well, there's that. Same would go for the new digital antenna I had installed. There'd be no TV for us in this area either. Thank goodness for DVDs in the TiVo box. And the next day, a historic walking tour of downtown Heppner included a clock tower converted to an electronic mechanism in the 1950s, but now has been restored to its original weighted pendulum, which requires winding every 8 days. The Morrow County Museum houses a fine collection of pioneer and agricultural artifacts, and chronicles the region's Great Flood of 1903. More about that in a minute. First, on our way into Heppner, we would trek into and through the Umatilla National Forest. The byway narrows and twists as it departs the highway, winding through hills and canyons on Willow Creek Road and into the 1.4 million acre Umatilla National Forest. Right at the National Forest border, Cutsforth Park has a campground and cabins for rent. Visitors will find ample trailheads for camping, hiking, horseback riding, or even trekking through the mountains on OHVs and mountain bikes. A half-hour side trip south on FR 5327 and 5316. Oh, and FR's Fire Road, by the way. A lot of that out this way. Anyway, a half-hour side trip south on FR 5327 and 5316 leads to Potamus Point, offering a magnificent canyon view of the wild and scenic North Fork John Day River drainage. And keep a lookout for bighorn sheep that have been recently reintroduced into the canyon. The Ukiah River Basin, 4 miles past Ukiah on the Byway, and the Bridge Creek Wildlife Area provide important wintering grounds for the Rocky Mountain elk, More than 1,000 elk gather here between December and May each year to escape the deep snows of the higher elevations. Further east, an overlook along the route provides another spectacular view into the North Fork John Day drainage and the North Fork John Day wilderness area. Established in 1984, the wilderness area protects the headwaters of the John Day River, the third longest undammed river in the lower 48 states. The North Fork John Day Campground marks the east end of the Blue Mountain Scenic Byway. It serves as a popular base for trout and steelhead fishing, or for exploring the Elkhorn Drive Scenic Byway, which intersects here. So that's some of what Oregon's official website has to say about the Blue Mountain Scenic Byway. But what about our travels through the area? So back to Heppner. First, just like everywhere we've been so far, the area was discovered and inhabited by Native Americans for over 10,000 years, before discovery and settlement by the white Euro-American settlers. Ancient petroglyphs have been found 45 miles or so north of Heppner in Oregon and Boardman that further document this activity. Prior to Heppner's founding in 1872, European American ranchers used the area for sheep and cattle range as early as 1858. Records suggest that these early cattlemen found abundant rye grasses along the creek bottom, continuing to draw settlement to the area. Heppner was originally called Stansbury Flats, after George W. Stansbury, one of the first European settlers to arrive in the area. In 1872, Colonel Jackson Lee Morrow, a merchant, entered into a partnership with Henry Heppner, another prominent businessman. They built a store on the crossing of present-day May and Main. Later, the town and the county would be named for these two early settlers, and Heppner would be named the county seat for Morrow County. Heppner would be incorporated in February of 1887. Soon thereafter, a mail and stagecoach line began operations between Pendleton and the Dalles, passing through Heppner. Heppner would continue to thrive as an agricultural hub as well as a commerce center for the surrounding farming communities for years. A real boon would happen for the town in 1888 when a railway line would be completed connecting Heppner with the Columbia River Gorge area, making commerce accessible between Portland and the inland eastern corner of the state. And then, June of 1903 happened. And with it, the Heppner flood. To this day, a major flash flood along Willow Creek remains the deadliest natural disaster in Oregon's history, and the second deadliest flash flood in the history of the U.S. 247 people died that night in Heppner, and the flood caused over $600,000 in damage, the equivalent of $19.5 million in damages by today's standards. Here's what happened. After an exceptionally dry spring, strong thunderstorms moved over the Heppner area, resulting in torrential rain and hailstorms. The region's arid climate and little vegetation, coupled with the ground already being wet from a storm 3 days earlier, caused very little water to be absorbed by the soil. Within 15 minutes, water had rushed down the streams, mainly the Balm Fork, toward Heppner. A steam laundry building initially acted as a dam when the water arrived, but failed under the stress just minutes later. This would send an estimated 20 to 40-foot wall of water cascading down Willow Creek and quickly reducing the many Heppner structures to rubble. At its peak, over 36,000 cubic feet per second of water raced down Willow Creek, which, by the way, is more than the average flow of the much larger Willamette River to the west. Many of the town's residents were able to escape to higher ground, but sadly 247 were not and lost their lives. At the time, this loss of life represented nearly a quarter of the town's population. The flood washed away over 140 structures, which was 1/3 of the town at the time. Now, an interesting, incredible side note to this tragedy. Two brave residents of Heppner, Les Matlock and Bruce Kelly, recognized what was happening. Seeing the impending doom for Heppner, They somehow managed to keep their wits about them. I can't even imagine how I would react when realizing that where I lived was about to be hit by a wall of water. But these two, they each grabbed a horse and raced downstream to the neighboring communities of Lexington and Ione, warning the residents of these two towns of the impending disaster, just seconds behind them. A memorial to these two would later be erected in Heppner's town center, documenting their bravery and how they managed to look beyond their impending loss and race to the next town to prevent the same loss of life in their neighboring communities. Nearly 500 people called Lexington and Ione home at the time, and both would sustain property loss, but incredibly, neither town reported any deaths as a result of the flood. No doubt, thanks in large part to the split-second warning their neighbors had brought them. A little later on, all three communities would experience around another 20 casualties in the months after the flood as a result of a typhoid epidemic. The flood had wreaked havoc with the primitive septic systems of the time, causing, at the time, an unknown water contamination. As I stood here in front of the memorial to this tragic event in Heppner's history and the brave actions of those two men, I wondered, how could one of the deadliest disasters in American history be lost to just that, history? But a quote from a publication called Crosscut sorta cleared that up for me. Turns out the courageous pioneers that came before us and made this place happen as we know it today, they were inclined not to ruminate on things over which they were powerless to change. They simply looked forward. A lesson I'll very likely take with me from this place called Heppner. Why would I waste energy on things that have already happened? I can't change them. I have no control over them. My control is in what I do with myself next. Crosscut also describes Heppner as a place not on the way to many other places, and Heppner's own town website today proclaims itself one of the gems of Oregon, a place where you enter the town a stranger and leave it as a friend. So it appears I have a new friend and a new perspective. Thanks, Heppner. I also found it interesting that the tragic flood of 1903 clearly demonstrated the need for flood control in the area, but the communities would wait nearly 70 years before the construction of the Willow Creek Dam. Some reading tells me that the delays were due to a few different things. First, the technology at the time simply did not exist to complete projects of such mass and technological scale. In addition, as technology and know-how did develop, funding became an issue. Areas affecting much larger metro areas would receive funding and prioritization well ahead of areas like Heppner and their surrounding communities. It would not be until 1969 when a geological study in the area began. 10 years later, the project would be greenlit and allocated $50 million, breaking ground in 1979. The dam would be completed in 1983, well under budget at $37 million. The Willow Creek Dam also holds the distinction of being the first major dam in the United States constructed using roller-compacted concrete. Having that distinction has led to decades of debate, even argument, over the dam's performance. Roller-compacted concrete, which essentially is a process through which the concrete is mixed in different ratios and sometimes even different materials altogether. The installation process is much different as well. The result was, within 2 years of the dam's completion, the reservoir had to be drained in order to address seepage issues. And while seepage was reduced significantly, there's still debate around overcurrent seepage levels and whether or not they are acceptable. Further additions and modifications have been made to the dam over the years, addressing not only these seepage issues, but concerns around water contamination and a chemical process potentially degrading the concrete over time. One of the larger debates that continue around the project involve the politics around using small towns as experiments for new construction technologies in the U.S. But beyond the dam and the reservoir, the town is also home to 2 museums, which for a town of 1,200 is more than just a little notable. First, the Morrow County Museum showcases the area's history and houses one of the finest collections of artifacts related to pioneer life, homesteading, agriculture, and rural history in the Northwest. The museum also dives headfirst into the impact of the Oregon Trail, which bisects Morrow County. Despite the desolate landscape through which the pioneers passed, their dreams of a green Oregon kept them moving forward. The collection includes hundreds of photographs documenting the social, economic, and technological development of Morrow County. Exhibits cover a wide range of topics from agricultural history to the Native American presence in the county, rural medical care, and the infamous Heppner flood. The museum also houses an agricultural equipment display encompassing over a city block of the mechanical inventions that pioneers first conceptualized, then perfected to help in the development of agriculture in the area. While taking photos of these early pieces of Americana, things that we would come to call tractors, I could only imagine what it must have felt like to spend hours on end in the iron seat of one of these engineering marvels, tilling through the fertile landscapes, stopping only to gas up and dream about what the future might hold with the upcoming harvest. And next up, while not a traditional museum, the Morrow County Courthouse itself is a historic gem in its own right. Built in 1909, it stands as a testament to the county's past, having witnessed countless legal proceedings, community gatherings, and other significant moments in Morrow County's history. Through all of this, early prosperity, a tragic flood, and the politics of the area today, Heppner's strong ties to its German, Swedish, and Irish heritage remains. Generational claims to the area are strong and welcoming to passers-by. And if you want to stay a bit and plant roots, they welcome that as well. We pulled out of Heppner on a beautiful July morning to check out the rest of the Blue Mountain Scenic Highway. I wonder what we'll learn there. Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously, you can.